Hey everyone, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Super excited to be here in session number 4 of 6 of our virtual series on improving your omni-channel understanding. So thanks to all of you who are joining in Zoom, as well as ones who are streaming through YouTube. Just a quick overview of Cmkg. This is my company that I started over 15 years ago. We're creators of best-in-class training, including online training, virtual training, and live classroom training. We work with retailers and suppliers in all different kinds of spaces. You can see down the right-hand side. And one of our favorite things that we've been focusing on this last year is virtual training, because since the pandemic, we had to shift gears a little bit and learn how to teach more effectively in the online space. So we're here today to give you a sample of that. So you're going to experience a virtual course. Some of you have been in all of our courses so far. And thank you for that. And I hope you're enjoying it. And I would love a shout out on social media if you have the opportunity. And then you're also going to learn new stuff on specific topics. So today we're specifically talking about the Omni Channel. And I'm also going to be providing you with access to a micro learning tool after that's going to include a book that comes from the notes from this presentation. So let's get started. In terms of virtual meeting guidelines, because this is a virtual meeting and not a webinar, that means that you can see each other's names. And, you know, if you feel comfortable with it, would love for you to turn on your camera. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you can keep it off. But when I'm working with teams from organizations, I usually get them to turn their cameras on, because as with any kind of web-based meetings, it just increases engagement and it kind of helps you to feel more connected. I'd also like for you to stay muted and participate. If you have things you want to say, please use the chat box and be as engaged as you can. Hi, David. You're brave. Nice to see you. Okay, so I am going to be going through and talking about the Omni Channel. And the first thing we need to do is really define what is meant by omni-channel. And I kind of have some different takes on that, because there's the retail omni-channel, and it's very similar to an evolution of multi-channel retailing. So you've got a single channel where a retail, and this is more traditional, where the retailer was selling through one type of store, whether it was brick and mortar or e-commerce. And they only sold through that store. Then multi-channel started to incorporate if they had different store formats. Might have been online, might have been, they had C-stores and grocery stores. And then there was also cross-channel, where they were trying to create more of a brand across the different channels that they sold in. Multi-channel strategy is often looked at as the omni-channel strategy, which is not the case. Your company may have a lot of ways to communicate with customers, but some might be more efficient than others. And if you take if your social media manager lacks responses and communications on Facebook, it's not aligned to the tone of voice on your other social pages, you're not providing a seamless omni-channel experience. I personally had quite a traumatic event happen last year. Our house burned down. And so I actually have had the opportunity in the last year, because we lost almost everything in our home. I had to buy everything pretty much online during a pandemic. And so my experience as a customer is quite profound, because we were spending tens of thousands of dollars on everything. And so I really learned the best and the worst of the whole omni-channel experience. Everything, from the stores that you're selecting from, to the real-time inventory that you can see, to how your shipment options and how quickly you're going to get it, to the customer service. So the customer service piece is actually a really key piece that I didn't realize how critical that was until I got into a few pickles with a not happy customer experience. So in omni-channel retailing, retailers need to track shoppers as they use different channels simultaneously, and there can't be these siloed approaches where you have your e-commerce team and then separately you have your brick and mortar team and you're treating them completely separately. So that's what a lot of retailers are trying to do right now, is create the experience across the brand, and regardless of where the shopper is on their learning journey, they don't care. They just want to be treated consistently and not have to repeat things or do things over again, or, oh, I have to talk to the store instead of to the online store, like those kind of things. So that's what I kind of consider omni-channel to be. So as we all know, the consumer and the shopper path have changed significantly, and even more so than COVID. We were finding it complex before COVID, and now it's even more complex. We as consumers are at home on our computers, spending up to 70% more time online than before. And we're also more engaged with social media, podcasts, online videos. Influencers play a huge role in marketing, finding recipes and how-tos and new hobbies we picked up, reading the news, getting updates on things like COVID and elections, things that are important to us individually, gaming, searching for information, finding apps. We're spending so much time in the online space. And within all of that, there's a lot of marketing and tracking that's going on in the background. And on the shopping side, there's also a lot of different options for shoppers to purchase from, with these being some of the most common places to purchase. And so retailers can track shoppers differently based on technologies and in-store setup. Like for example, in brick and mortar stores may have Wi-Fi, RFID, store apps, and ways to communicate with shoppers while they're in the stores. And this obviously varies significantly by retailer and by format. Since COVID hit, the consumers also changed from a shopping perspective and where they buy. Fear has driven to purchase more in the online e-commerce, with more 30 to 40-year-olds purchasing more online than ever before, as well as baby boomers. So there was a lot of new entries into the online space. And it's really going to be interesting in the upcoming year, because a lot of new habits were formed. We've heard, it takes 90 days to create a habit. And so it's going to be really interesting to see as things evolve this year, and as restaurants open up, and as our retail stores go back to a new normal, kind of where this all plays out, and how much stays online, and how much consumers choose to go back to the brick and mortar stores. So it's individually up to each retailer and vendor how well where they're going to show up in the consumer's path when they're online and when they're in stores for a seamless shopping experience that so many are looking for. And there's so many disruptors going on here as well, because you've got Facebook and Pinterest and such that are actually selling within those interfaces. And so regardless if you're in category management or shopper insights or marketing or sales or retail store ops, you need to understand this omni-channel. It's kind of a scary place, but it's one that we all need to be talking about in most of our conversations, internally, as well as if you're calling on retail customers, ensuring that you're really thinking about things from a more holistic omni-channel perspective, both from the retail perspective, but also from the shopper perspective, because that consumer that then becomes a shopper, they are in the omni-channel space, and God only knows where they're going to go, because their path to purchase is so driven by impulse versus planned purchases and what it is they're going to buy. And so there's a lot of different parts in place there. And like I said, since the pandemic hit, this has even further been exacerbated. So we really need to make sure that we're staying tuned with where that shopper is and where they're buying and kind of how that affects all of the different retail formats. And the other interesting thing to think about is that the retail formats that you see here, this now becomes the total market. So in the past, we've been able to talk about total market, using our Nielsen or IRI data with their total market. But unfortunately, that gray area that we're not certain about in the online space is getting bigger. And so we really need how to reflect that into our analytics and the data that we're looking at. And that's kind of what I want to dig into in a little bit more detail, is looking across the retail formats and the different types of data available, because it is constantly changing. I caveat this by noting that if things I've captured in here are missing, I'd love to hear from you so that we can update this model with all of the correct and evolving information, because it's changing every day. It honestly, every time I read something on the news or something, it's updated, or there's a new source, or there's a new perspective that Nielsen is providing. So I'd love to hear from you so we can update this. I'm also looking for ways to improve this approach. So if you have a perspective that should be incorporated into this evolving omni-channel data perspective, the cool thing is it's kind of like there's not a lot out there. And so I'm trying to kind of build some foundations that we can all learn from. So let's take a look first at pure play e-commerce, with retailers who focus their efforts and resources on e-commerce business only. They typically offer home delivery, while some also offer pickup in specific locations. And this in itself, if you start to understand these pickup locations and home delivery and buy online, pickup in store, the complexities behind the product supply chain are so elevated. And so it's a really important part for you to understand as well about the omni-channel. Here's some examples of some pure play e-commerce retailers that are out there. And although ones like Amazon are investing in brick and mortar stores for a more seamless shopping experience for their shoppers, so a lot of e-commerce retailers are starting to try to get into the brick and mortar space, and vice versa. So lots of change going on all the time. And so sometimes it's these actual retailers that I'm sharing and stuff, and they change names, or they were bought and they've now become, an omni-channel. So anyways, so these are pure play e-commerce retailers. They really got way ahead of all of the retailers who chose to ignore what was going on in the online space. And so when the pandemic hit, these retailers, as well as the ones who were able to get some of the technologies in place prior to the pandemic, they were well equipped to be successful when the pandemic did hit, because they had a lot of the technologies and infrastructure in place in order to really be able to meet the needs of a pandemic. So these are some of the data sources that are available in e-commerce: POS data, retailer direct, panel data. And the panel data also includes your more traditional, well, it's not traditional, but like numerator panel data. And I know that Nielsen and IRI data have some semblance of e-commerce, but not nearly as robust. There's also shopper research data, shopper insights, as well as additional data. So there's a lot of different data sources that come into play in the e-commerce space for you to understand that. Next, we have brick and mortar. So those retailers with physical stores only and no e-commerce presence. And this is becoming less and less, because most retailers at this point have realized that you almost have to have an online presence. Brick and mortar retailers have obviously had a tough time in 2020, driven by the surge in the digital economy from COVID, the changing shopper journey, and the increase of shopping online. So a lot of the brick and mortar retailers who did not have a strong e-commerce presence, they either had to step up to the plate and make something up pretty darn quick for their shoppers, which some were able to successfully do. And unfortunately, some of them shuttered their doors because they just weren't able to survive. And I think we're going to continue to see some other retailers shuttering their doors this year from that. So data types from brick and mortar data sources are syndicated POS, the traditional Nielsen and IRI data, they include partial online, but there's a lot of retailers who do not share their online, and especially the pure play e-commerce retailers, they do not share that data. And so that's where that gray area, that black hole that I was talking about, because your total market isn't reflected in any data sources right now. I'll talk about that in a little while, but even so, you should be taking a look at it and understanding it and being able to go in and talk about and not be scared about referring to some of the stuff that's going on in the online space. There's also retailer direct data that retailers are providing that data to their suppliers. Panel data, with third-party panel data, with consumers tracking their purchases. This ends up being a very, very rich data source. It's been one of my favorite data sources for many years, but underutilized sometimes by organizations. Then we've got the shopper research, shopper insights, and the additional data sources as well. So there's a lot of brick and mortar data available. And then we have Omnichannel, which is the retailers that I've already spent some time talking about. They typically give their shoppers options of when and where they purchase and how they receive their goods. And these are some of the examples of omni-channel retailers who are pretty successful at this point. And you know, some of these retailers really stepped up to the plate. And even if you think about, I know I'm from Calgary up in Canada, and you know, my pet store that I go to all the time, that's just a local pet store, they did a phenomenal job suddenly trying to put together a website. And because of my loyalty to them, when they were closed, I allowed them to have some errors along the way because I got it that this was a significant shift for them, and they actually have thrived through the pandemic as well. But the omni-channel data sources are similar to the other ones, but there's a lot of disconnects in it. And it's one of the biggest things and the biggest reasons why a lot of companies are starting to invest in AI and machine learning, because trying to incorporate all of these data sources together and draw the insights all on your own, our human brains, we don't have the capacity or the time to be able to dig into it the way that we need to in order to be agile and make decisions and recommendations based on what the data is saying. So one of the things I would say is that even though it is kind of a scary time because we're hearing a lot about AI and machine learning, and you can bet your boots that everybody is going to be having to invest in this at some level. It shouldn't be as scary as sometimes we're making it. It may be replacing jobs where people are data pullers, but you still need the human brain to be able to go through the data sources and make decisions and recommendations, because there's this whole strategic component. And if you haven't heard me talk before, if you're not doing a basis of strategy behind the decisions and recommendations that are coming out of the data, you're probably going to make the wrong decisions, because AI and machine learning can only go so far. And it's a heck of a long time, if ever, that we will be able to completely rely on AI and machine learning. So that's why you need to be, as an individual, not scared of the future, but really trying to understand and embrace it. There's so many great materials and tools, both in the online space, in our learning. We do a lot of training. We also are navigating this. You know, sometimes I have to go do a ton of research for some of the topics we do, because I'm certainly not an expert on omnichannel. But you really want to make sure that you challenge yourself and don't go back to thinking that we can just go back to the way that we were doing things before and, you know, drawing your insights from your syndicated data and going and presenting to your retail customers without any regard of everything that has changed. We need to understand so intimately the changes in shopper, and we can do a lot of that through the panel data. We need to be able to look at our own data, especially versus a year ago when we're looking at shares and percent changes and those kind of things, and properly interpreting what those numbers mean, because it's a lot more complicated than it was 18 months ago. And so you really need to embrace the fact that we all need to be practitioners of understanding the shopper, understanding the data sources, regardless of the role that you are in. So this diagram kind of really does help to kind of wrap things up here, because you're looking at the different types of retailers, and then also the key data sources that you really do need to understand, and understand specifically within your organization what you do have access to, where there may be holes, and where there may be opportunity for further data, realizing that in a lot of cases, the data budget is not expanding. And so it makes it a lot more complicated to figure out what data sources to have. So I put together this chart. You can see the differences between brick and mortar, omnichannel, and pure play e-commerce. You know, when you're looking for a total market and shopper perspective, there are panel data sources now that span across all the areas. And so this is one area that you can kind of go look at for a consistent total market and shopper perspective. And then the other one that you really need to be digging into is that shopper insights and understanding that shopper journey specific to your categories or to the retail formats that you sell in and your retailer. And it's not that you need to be at every spot along the way for the shopper journey. But what we need to understand is who our target shoppers are, and kind of what's happening to them, what happened to them in 2020, how do we move forward in 2021 to keep our eye on them and to continue to understand what this journey looks like, and be at the places where our most important target shoppers are hanging out in the online space, and the points at where they're deciding to purchase. And so that changes the game for retailers, because, you know, they have to look at being in Facebook and Pinterest and those kind of things if they want to be selling to shoppers at different points along their shopper journeys. And so that's what makes it so complicated, is that every shopper journey is different by category, by shopper type, and so on. And so, you know, we're going to be seeing things kind of shaking out in the next year or two here as we see more retailers and suppliers investing in AI and machine learning. Don't be scared of it, really embrace it. Try to get involved on the teams that are doing it, you know, because, you know, data science provides the ability to do the AI and the machine learning, but they may not understand the business side, the business case. So that's where we come in, because we need to be understanding the category strategies, the retail strategies, your brand strategies. I'm doing a presentation today at the CMA conference on a bigger picture of Omnichannel. And one of the biggest areas of opportunity is to get rid of some of these internal silos and think that one department only owns the shopper, and that we can't really keep the shopper and the consumer separate anymore, because there's this blurred line of when they are a consumer, and sometimes they're not even a consumer, they just go straight into shopper because they did an impulse purchase. And so we need to be thinking much more broadly about shopper across the entire organization, and not holding it in our back pocket, you know, in that shopper insights. It kind of reminds me of category management from 10 or 15 years ago, when we were like these gods sitting in the ivory tower, you know, disseminating information at specific times behind things. We all need to be embedded and engaged in this shopper journey and understanding the omnichannel. So the opportunity for you is to improve your perspective, analytics, and your approach to category reviews, business reviews, assortment, all centered around the shopper. An omnichannel category review needs to reflect the total market as much as possible: brick and mortar, pure play e-commerce, and omnichannel. because the shopper journey spans the entire omnichannel across all retail formats in different ways relative to some of the categories that you might participate in. It might not be quite as profound, or they might be eating your lunch right now and you need to understand them. Competitors exist for both retailers and vendors across all retail formats. It's a more strategic and holistic way to look at the total market, total shopper, and the total category results. So I really challenge you to find ways to reflect a broader omnichannel perspective in your work for better shopper-focused solutions. There you go. So in terms of next steps, I hope you found the training valuable. After this course, you'll receive an email with a resource book link for this course, and also a link to the webinar recording. You also have information about the instructor-led virtual training that I offer that can, in an example like a course like this, that we can provide, we can actually dig in and try to develop an omni-channel approach to your analytics. And there's also the opportunity for you to purchase an annual subscription if you're here as an individual, where you can access all of the courses. There's one on the Omni channel. There's ones on all of the courses that I've been running over these virtual training sessions. And it's a really great way for you to access training for a pretty inexpensive price. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about data visualization, which is another one of my favorite topics, with 3 tips to make your presentations come alive. Because in this whole virtual space, we also have to change our approach to our presentations and make sure that we are making them look and feel great and engaging for our audience. So that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow. I'm going to stay on the line for a few minutes for any questions that you may have, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you very much.